My work has been described as being quite ambitious, and I assume that that relates to the materials that I use in relation to the concepts that I have, in the sense that I am sometimes described as a bit of a perfectionist, in that when it comes to the specific materials, there is no limit to what I will try to achieve. Obviously, there is a limit in this world and a practicality to consider, but I do a lot of research into my materials to attempt to make my ideas come to fruition. And financially speaking, it can be quite a lot of an investment, and not just financially, but very time consuming. So how do I make it happen is certainly allowing for a lot of time. So I don't conjure works up necessarily very quickly. I would say that I'm more of a slow cooking kind of artist. Having said that, that slowness can allow for those moments of inspiration which actually are kind of outside of time. So you might be just daydreaming one day, and then you'll have an idea. And sometimes that idea can be so simple. For example, in one of these works in the gallery, I would say perhaps, if not the most successful, certainly just as successful as some of the more complex works, is the simple one feather quill pierced into the wall, and there's a drip of ink flowing from the piercing. And so all you have is the feather, the shadow, and the ink, and it pretty much cost me nothing, and it came out of nowhere, I suppose. Obviously it came out of somewhere, and I think that somewhere is creating the space for those ideas to come. But as for the other works, they take a lot of time to play with the materials and decide what is going to be appropriate, but at the same time, it's an evolving process. So some of the materials have been sourced from local materials, such as the Wombian marble in this exhibition. And I didn't originally know that I wanted to use Wombian marble. I guess a little bit of happenstance and luck should have it that I, next to my studio happened to be a stonemason, and they had this beautiful piece of Wombian marble. And I knew I wanted to use marble, but that led me to do research into the actual place where this marble came from, which led to me to Wombian, which is south of Sydney, and that's where the photographs evolved from. So that's just to illustrate how things can evolve in terms of what my original ambitions might be. But as for the pens and the glass works, which you can see here, that started maybe 18 months ago, and I guess I need that long leeway because I don't have necessarily a massive budget, so I have to find the right people to work with often. So in a sense, people that are willing to work with me, collaborators in some extent, or fabricators that have a certain sympathy towards what I'm doing. And also, I guess there's the practicality of having to save up for these things, or in some cases apply for grants. I feel one thing to note is that with my works being somewhat ambitious is that I'm reluctant to compromise on the quality, And by the quality, I mean that I'm particularly invested in the materials, that they are, a particular kind of marble, and where does that marble come from? And if I'm using indigo in the work, I want to know the history of the indigo, and I want it to be natural indigo, not posing as natural indigo, because there are synthetic versions available. So in that sense, that kind of integrity can be ambitious, because artists have to make do to some extent, and we don't always have the luxury of using the materials that we want to. And that's another reason why I don't make work that frequently. It's a slow accumulation, so that I can make it happen the way I hope it will. But having said that, I think once the work is made, I really enjoy the fact that I actually don't have much control over it. Like the fact that I'm using materials that do change, like indigo is a live culture that will not necessarily obey the way that I want things to go, or the ink flowing over the sculpture. I can try my best to set up the scenario, but ultimately it has a life of its own. It's a good question, and I'd have to think about that one. I think, to guess at this moment, I like to make connections, and intuitively those connections, I feel, have a historical context. And for me, to use, say, for example, natural indigo has a past to it. Now, I guess if I was to use something more contemporary, it wouldn't have such a long history. It would have its own story. And I think it's just a natural compulsion that I have towards the deeper sense of time. For example, using that solid marble, which has been quite a challenge because it's 260 kilos. Why would I want to put myself through that pain? Well, it was a learning curve in this exhibition, and ultimately that particular work, which is called Without in this Phantom Limb exhibition, I wanted to make a reference to a deeper sense of time, like an ecological, geological sense of time. More geological in the sense that this exhibition is called Phantom Limb, and I found it very compelling, this idea that we're walking the ground in which history was made, in that there are phantoms beneath the surface, and that marble is basically made up of this earth, and the strata of the paper is, I guess, the paper which is above the marble is a more contemporary time. So it's more about the present, and the marble is, I guess, a time which is part of us, but not necessarily, we can't split it up into what it's made up of, but it is made up of everything. Very important, I would say. The diversity, probably not so much as the fact that the materials are important to me. I'm very interested in materiality of art, in the sense that making a connection between the embodied form of the art and the, I suppose, intangible aspect which comes from wherever. And the idea of absence and presence in my work is very much at the forefront. And I like to think that even though I'm dealing with a subject matter that could be described as absent, or the subject matter or theme is absence itself. For me, the presence of the material can't be separated from what I'm trying to articulate. So even though I'm trying to articulate something about what isn't there, I need to use the materials to do that. And that kind of paradox, you could say, is particularly fascinating to me, because it's not about solely about the invisible or what isn't there. It's having to use the language that we have, whether it's art, materials, or literally words. How do we articulate what we can't say? Which I know sounds very confusing, but I think exploring different materials, I'm using them. Well, I guess I want to get to know the materials, but I also want to get to know what are the qualities of the materials that can express something that is not clearly evident otherwise, if that, I hope, makes sense. A particular material that has been significant in my practice for this body of work and previous work is the indigo pigment. And indigo pigment is something that I've used in my work, not just conceptually but also materially. So traditionally, indigo pigment is a dye. Indigo means from India. But the actual Hindu word for indigo is nila, which means very dark. So it's kind of a very mysterious material that's over the centuries been used to dye clothes blue. And it also has a cultural and historical significance, being traded across the Silk Road between East and West. And that's something I researched in my work, because last year I went to China and photographed the Taklamakan Desert, which is a significant trade route between the East and West. But coming back to the actual material of indigo, what has made it very mysterious in the past is the fact that it's a dye that needs to be fermented in order for it to work. And so it can be a little bit temperamental, and it takes traditionally about a month for the indigo to come alive, or actually to flower. It's a live fermentation process. But what I've enjoyed about that process is kind of a little bit alchemical, in that you need to feed the colour like sugar or dates in order for it to keep going. And there's different materials that you need to use to conjure up the colour. And one of them, most traditionally, people find now quite humorous, is that urine was the most common liquid that you need to mix indigo for it to come alive. And so it should happen that I was very fortunate that I discovered, to my luck, I thought, where am I going to find, 40 litres of aged urine? And as it happened, there were 40 litres sitting for me in my mother's garden as she collects it for her plants. So the key factor which I found fascinating with indigo, apart from the alchemical process which brings it to fruition, is that when it does flower, what happens is you lower your fabric into the vat, which is this dark kind of mysterious vat, and you pull out your silk or your cotton, and you'll find that it's this lime green yellow colour. But the process of bringing it out into the air, it transforms in front of your eyes from yellow to blue to dark blue. And that transformation itself from green to blue, I think, is very evocative. It suggests transformation, and it also suggests a fugitive quality of something that you can't quite capture, which is a theme, I think, relevant to my work in that sense of the intangible nature of things, but being made visible through materials, and in this case, indigo. This is, I guess, the eternal question for an artist. Something very difficult to put your finger on. For me, I have so many ideas, and they're kind of all so many levels, I guess, that I explore in my work, which I hope comes across in the work itself. So inspiration, I would definitely say, comes from my life and my experiences on a very fundamental level. I think there's no denying that I make work from experience. And by that, I guess I mean I don't always know where it's coming from. It's a very intuitive place, which can sound like I'm trying to evade the question. But it's, I mean, because there are other ways of generating ideas that are quite valid. And I think personal relationships have a lot to do with it, in the sense that this current body of work admittedly comes from an experience of my father's passing. And although I could also say that before that occurred, it almost felt like I was preparing for that experience, because in a sense I was making work about death without actually consciously considering where it was leading. But I think in some way, not that I knew what was going to happen, but in some way we all know what's going to happen eventually. So that was I think the fact that we're all going to pass is an enduring source of inspiration for me. To me, it's like the ultimate unknown. It's a question that will always be fruitful because we can't know the answer. And in that sense, it's an ongoing dilemma in my work. That great sense of unknown, and from that darkness, I suppose you could say, there's so much to explore. I think it's that's what I would call infinite, that sense of continual questioning. And not to say that you don't let go and stop and, smell the roses or some other flower. It's just the mystery is really what compels my work. And I don't mean it in some fluffy kind of way. It's very much a embodied sense of mystery, or an embodied sense of unknown that is inseparable from the fact that we actually exist. It's not somewhere out there. It's much more personal and an inward sense of mystery. That is a tough question when you're put on the spot. And I'm going through the beginnings of my art practice and thinking, was there a particular moment, or was there little micro moments? I would definitely say probably the moment I realized that I didn't actually have to know what I was doing to make art. And that when you realize that, it's a kind of freeing thing, that where the work comes from doesn't have to come from the head, and in the sense that you can have an experimental way of making work where the results aren't going to necessarily work out. So I would say not knowing is an epic moment, specifically related to my practice. There would be other moments too, and probably from like an early point, it would have been when I was still studying my honours, which was some time ago, winning the Blake Prize. Because it was an award for the spiritual in art, I think that was a very, I'm not sure if reassuring is the right word, but just a good thing, because it made me feel like I was going in the right direction, which I suppose as an artist, or particularly a young artist, you can feel unsure if what you're doing is valued when you're still trying to work out your place in it all. And I think that helps me kind of remember a certain, I suppose, to realize that you need to find your place. And to me, I suppose the spiritual in art is something that has never left my practice. And other epic moments, I would have to say, are probably more personal life experiences that have triggered or been catalysts for work, whether that's been, traumatic experiences or happy moments as well. Certainly travel is another aspect. I would say epic is actually probably good word, because I am particularly attracted to vast open spaces which have that epic quality. I've got it now. Climbing the volcano, that was an epic moment. Spending, was it 8 hours up through the jungle, uphill pretty much the whole way, not knowing what I was going to see when I got to the top. I was actually looking for nothing. I was looking for an empty, vast space, a kind of, a graveyard of sorts, or a place of an ash plain where there would be lots of potential but nothing there. However, when I got to the top of the volcano, it was the closest experience I have ever had to the sublime, in that I didn't know what was coming, and I got to the top and it was just mind expanding, incomprehensible basically. And so that's my epic moment.